It is time to return to one of my most favorite series that I do on my channel, 10 wild examples of Pokémon censorship. This series is really fun for a lot of reasons, and so far we've done 3 videos on the subject. But if you can believe it, there is even more material to cover here, so sit back, relax, and get ready to take a look at even more wild examples of Pokémon censorship. Okay, so when it comes to this series and what I cover, I try and find the wildest stuff that I can, and a good amount of time that comes from the manga. If you've watched the other videos in this series, you would know that the Pokémon manga, in all of its various series and forms that have been produced, does not mess around when it comes to censor-worthy content. It actually gets pretty crazy, and a lot of the stuff is actually worthy of being censored. So, as such, why don't we go ahead and start there. Within the Ruby and Sapphire arc of the Pokémon Adventures manga, in the chapter Versus Altaria, May, or Sapphire as she's known here, comes into contact with a trainer and her Zigzagoon, who she says has gotten sick. Sapphire quickly leaps into action, saying that she'll examine the Zigzagoon herself, but in the Japanese version of this chapter, instead of simply just examining the Zigzagoon, Sapphire gets up close and personal with it by sniffing its butt. And I mean really sniffing its butt, with nose-to-butt contact and everything. This was edited out in the English version of the manga, including the detail that was given to Zigzagoon's butt, but it doesn't end there, because in the following panels after this moment, Sapphire can be seen with poop on her nose, as if this whole situation wasn't already weird enough. This was obviously edited out for the English release as well, and while some censorship edits in Pokémon can be seen as questionable, this one was definitely warranted, if I do say so myself. From one ridiculous moment to another, also within the Ruby and Sapphire arc of Pokémon Adventures, is Chapter 209, Versus Slaking 1. Within this chapter, there's a moment where Norman gets mad at Brendan, or Ruby in this case, for running away from home, and ends up grabbing him by the shirt and eventually punches him. This was edited out of the English release, which isn't unusual at all considering punches and slaps are often edited out from the manga, anime, etc. whenever they occur. However, it's how they chose to edit out this punch that's so ridiculous. In the English release, Ruby is edited out of this panel entirely, and Norman letting go of Ruby, which was due to the punch, is instead explained by a lightning strike that startles Norman and causes him to lose his grip. Like, of all the edits you could have made, and of all the alternative explanations you could have given for this situation, this is what you went with? A lightning strike? That is honestly ridiculous, but what's arguably even more ridiculous is that this was suggested as an idea, and the publishers and everyone else that's involved in the manga's localization just apparently nodded their heads and said, yeah, that sounds good. Turning this duo of wild manga moments into a trio, though, is something that yet again comes from Ruby and Sapphire, except this time it's from the Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire arc. They clearly don't hold back in Hoenn, because in the 601st chapter of Pokémon Adventures, Beedrill Get Ready, there's a scene where Emerald, a manga-exclusive character, can't sleep and decides to take a walk, when one of Hoopa's rings suddenly appears behind him. Sounds pretty standard so far, except that in the Japanese version, in this same scene where Hoopa's ring appears behind Emerald, he is seen peeing instead. Just casually peeing right smack dab in the middle of the panel, presented front and center for everyone to see. Now, you obviously can't see anything here, and it's just peeing, so it's really not that big of a deal, but it's kind of funny that they felt the need for him to pee here at all, let alone put it front and center as the main focus of this page. Okay, so we've established once again that the Pokémon manga is wild and ridiculous, and certainly does not hold back, but it's not the only place where crazy censorship happens either. It also happens in the anime, and in this next case, it was for something much different than censoring a guy who had to pee. I'm sure you all know about the infamous episode of the anime known as Electric Soldier Porygon. This episode was banned internationally after a sequence of bright flashing lights within the episode caused many kids watching in Japan to have seizures. However, due to the sheer gravity of this event, Pokémon were not leaving anything to chance, and not only banned this episode internationally as previously stated, but also edited many previous episodes to remove or reduce the amount of flashing that occurred in various moments. This even extended to the games as well, as certain moves like Thunderbolt had their animations slowed to reduce the amount of flashing when the Gen 1 games eventually made their way outside of Japan. What makes this situation especially ironic though is that just like how many people point out with the Electric Soldier Porygon episode that Pikachu and not Porygon was actually the source of the flashing that caused all the problems, Pikachu is also the source of the flashing in many of the moments that were edited from previous episodes as well, and even technically the games, since Thunderbolt is an electric type move that is often used by Pikachu. Which means that truly, if anyone was gonna be banned from the anime, like Porygon has been, it absolutely should have been Pikachu in terms of who was actually guilty. Even more crazy stuff has happened with the anime though, and even more episodes have been banned outside of just Electric Soldier Porygon. However, more episodes have been banned in certain parts of the world than in others, and one of the places that has had more banned episodes to its name is South Korea. South Korea has banned certain episodes of the anime that haven't been banned in other places, such as Challenge of the Samurai and Ninja Poke Showdown, due to the more overt presence of Japanese culture within these episodes, and because of the anti-Japanese sentiment that exists within the country. This also prevented other Pokémon products from getting into the country for a time as well, such as the games, as none of the Gen 1 games were officially released in South Korea during their original release, and it wasn't until Pokémon Gold and Silver that the country would see the release of a main series game, and even then, the games were only made available 2.5 years after their initial release in Japan. We are not yet done with the anime stuff though, because if you can believe it, it just keeps getting crazier. I'm sure many of you remember going to see the early Pokémon movies in theaters as a kid, and you probably remember how before the actual movie started, a short involving Pikachu and its own adventures would play. Well, these are all a part of a whole series of Pikachu shorts that often were played alongside the earlier movies. One in particular that played with the third movie, Spell of the Unknown, was titled Pikachu and Pichu, and it featured your usual adorable Pikachu shenanigans, which were made even more adorable by the inclusion of Pichu as well. However, something interesting happened with this short, as it was actually banned in Japan following the revelation that the narrator of this short, Noriko Sakai, had been arrested for drug possession. This occurred in 2009 and even prevented this short from being included in the Pikachu short DVD set that released a few years later. It also has not seen any other kind of rerun or re-release since then. The anime is actually responsible for a pretty good amount of our examples today, because we have yet another one here, and this time it comes from Pokémon Journeys. Now, up to this point, we've had a lot of stuff that was censored pretty legitimately, and censoring was actually warranted in those situations. But this next example is a pretty silly one in my opinion, that probably would have been fine without the censorship. So, in episode 14 of Journeys, Raid Battle in the Ruins, Ash and Go head to Unova and explore the desert resort, and come across some Cofagrigus. They beat the Cofagrigus in battle, who are revealed to have a person and a Psyduck inside of them, who are then let free. It's then explained by Kira, a Pokemon Ranger who Ash and Go met up with, that the Cofagrigus were low to the ground due to having someone trapped inside their bodies, and this is where the censorship kicks in, because during Kira's explanation of this, a demonstration of a body going into Cofagrigus is shown, and this shot was cut from the dub. Now, you can probably imagine why this was cut, since it depicts a body going into a coffin, and especially with the pose that the body is in, it could be inferred that this is a dead body that is going into Cofagrigus. However, given that just moments before this we already established that people can get trapped inside of Cofagrigus, and we saw an actual person shown to be in one as well, I personally think this edit was a little unnecessary, especially considering that the kids you're editing this for aren't going to make that aforementioned connection at all, and it's honestly just gonna fly completely over their heads. Next, let's go ahead and take a break from the anime and focus on something else that I'm actually surprised I haven't talked about in this series to this point, and that is Lenora. I think I've kind of waited to talk about this one up until now because it is a little more well known, but it is still super significant in terms of censorship and therefore is worth talking about. Basically, Lenora had her official design changed shortly after the release of Pokémon Black and White, from her wearing a large apron to her having that apron simply just slung over her shoulder and oftentimes not even having it at all. This change was made due to the concern that was raised following Black and White's release that Lenora was portraying a racial stereotype due to her wearing an apron and also being a black character. This resulted in more significant change than just a slight design update though, as Lenora's apron was removed entirely from the dubbed versions of the anime, and in the Adventures manga she discards the apron almost immediately, and upon the manga being localized, the apron was just straight up removed entirely. This concern and minor controversy surrounding Lenora's character is also very possibly a reason why she was demoted as a gym leader in Black and White 2, because after the concern, Game Freak probably wanted to take as much attention away from her as they could. However, according to character designer Yusuke Omura, in an interview that has been translated by Pokemon and video game historian Dr. Lava, Game Freak had a completely different thought process behind the design. In the interview, Omura said that there was talk during Black and White's development about wanting to focus on the inclusion of a multinational and multiracial vibe. So with that in mind, we came up with this black woman, and we'd received orders that she should have a strong sort of body type and some motherly qualities. So we added the apron when thinking about this motherly concept, but actually, the apron made Lenora give off the impression that she was just an average mom. So, because she works as the head of the Nakreen Museum, discovering fossils and stuff like that, we tried incorporating elements of a kind of work apron that could be useful in dealing with such a wild kind of job. We hadn't had a gym leader that wears an apron before, so we figured that was another good reason to have Lenora wearing one. So ultimately, this whole situation seems to just have been an unfortunate coincidence that the developers hadn't considered when developing the Gen 5 games. But nevertheless, they had to act to address the concerns that were brought up after their release. Now we're going to take a quick look at Pokemon Go, because you know it was only a matter of time before Go got involved in all the censorship action. Back in 2020, it was reported by players that Pokemon Go was not allowing them to nickname their Pokemon with names that were the actual official names of Pokemon themselves. For example, Pokemon could not be nicknamed Ho-Oh, Shroomish, or Lickitung according to players, seemingly because the word Ho, Shroom, and Lick could be construed from the names. Needless to say, the Pokemon Go word filter was kinda crossing the line a little bit with these ones, but it's not the only time that something like this has happened either, because we have also seen similar things happen with word filters in the official games. For instance, in Generation 5, the Pokemon Cofagrigus was not able to be traded on the GTS without being nicknamed first, due to Cofagrigus' name unintentionally having a word within it that would be picked up by the filter. This has since been updated though, so that it no longer affects the Pokemon. Additionally, another similar situation also occurred with Sharpedo on the GTS as well, where it could not be traded without a nickname due to the GTS's filter recognizing the word that is unintentionally formed at the end of Sharpedo's name. And that was a lot of crazy censorship. What do you guys think about all this though? Let me know all of your thoughts about this crazy stuff in the comments below, and be sure to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more if you're new. With that said, I will be back with another video very soon, and until then, as always, thank you all so much for watching this one, I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.